Patton Nagar was the name that memory gave to the strange armored landscape left behind after Asal Uttar. In the fields around Kaimkaran and Asal Uttar, Pakistani tanks that had entered the battle as instruments of breakthrough became wrecks, trophies, obstacles, and evidence. Some had been destroyed by gunfire. Some had bogged down in soft or flooded ground. Some had been abandoned when crews could no longer recover them under fire, or when the offensive itself lost coherence. Later, many of these vehicles, especially the American-built Pattons that had carried such symbolic weight, were gathered into a display that came to be remembered as Patton Nagar, or Patton Town. The image was unforgettable, but it should be approached with seriousness rather than celebration. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The battlefield after a tank battle has a particular silence in the imagination, even if the actual days afterward are full of noise, orders, recovery work, and danger. A tank is built to move, to dominate space, and to give its crew the power to survive and strike. When it is burned out or stranded, it becomes something else entirely, a steel shell marking where movement failed. At Asal Uttar, this change was especially dramatic because the Patton had represented modern armored confidence. Pakistan's armored plan depended on speed, mass, and the belief that a powerful thrust could turn the Kaimkaran sector into a route toward the Bias line. Patton Nagar showed the opposite result. The machines had not opened the road. They had become proof that the road had closed.
The visual aftermath mattered because armored warfare is often remembered through images. A destroyed infantry position may be rebuilt, a shell crater may fill with water, and a field may eventually return to crops. But tanks left standing in defeat are hard to forget. Their size makes them visible, and their reputation gives them symbolic force. The wrecked Pattons around Asal Uttar became a public shorthand for the battle, especially in India, where they represented the defeat of a technologically impressive armored thrust by preparation, nerve, and defensive skill. Yet a shorthand is never the whole story. A tank graveyard can tell the listener that something decisive happened, but it cannot by itself explain how that decision was produced. The phrase Patton Nagar can also mislead if it makes the aftermath feel neat or theatrical. The vehicles did not arrive in rows as exhibits. They were scattered across fields, near tracks, in wet ground, around local positions, and along the routes where the Pakistani attack had slowed or broken. Some were burned. Some were intact enough to be recovered. Some were dangerous because of ammunition, mines, fuel, or uncertainty about the ground around them. Recovery teams, engineers, and soldiers had to deal with the aftermath carefully. The battle did not end with a curtain falling. It left behind damaged machines, dead and wounded men, unexploded weapons, ruined crops, displaced civilians, and the hard labor of making a battlefield safe enough to count and clear. The Pattons themselves became symbols, partly because they had been symbols before the battle. They were associated with modern American armor, with Pakistan's confidence in its armored arm, and with the idea that superior-looking equipment could produce decisive movement. When many of them were found destroyed or captured, the reversal seemed almost cinematic. But the serious lesson is not that the Patton was worthless. It was a capable tank for its time, and Indian soldiers respected the danger it posed. The lesson is that a capable tank committed into unfavorable conditions can lose the advantages that made it frightening. At Asal Uttar, mines, flooding, crops, village positions, artillery, Indian armor, and anti-tank weapons combined to make the Patton fight a battle it was not free to shape. The display of captured and wrecked tanks also became part of national morale. Armies and societies need symbols after hard fighting, and Asal-Uttar offered a powerful one. The sight of enemy armor, once feared, now immobilized and gathered together, made the defensive victory tangible. It showed soldiers and civilians that the thrust toward the Bias had failed, not as an abstract staff conclusion, but as metal that could be seen and counted. This mattered in a war where information, rumor, and national confidence all played important roles. Still, the educator's task is to keep the symbol in proportion. Pathan Nagar was not the victory itself, it was the residue of the victory, the visceral trace left by decisions, errors, discipline, and suffering. The danger of any tank graveyard story is that it can turn battle into spectacle. Wreckage can invite triumphal language, especially when one side's famous machines are displayed as trophies. But every destroyed tank was once occupied by men who faced fear, heat, smoke, impact, and the possibility of death in a confined steel space. Some crews were killed, others escaped wounded or shaken. Some may have abandoned vehicles under circumstances that later observers could judge too easily from safety. Serious history does not need to deny military success in order to treat the defeated as human beings. The destroyed Pathans were evidence of tactical and operational failure, but they were also evidence of war's violence against crews who had been sent into a collapsing plan. For Indian soldiers, the aftermath also carried a complicated meaning. The battlefield proved that their defensive box had held and that the Pakistani offensive had been stopped. Units that had withdrawn under pressure could now see that the withdrawal had not been disgrace, but preparation. Infantrymen who had held villages, engineers who had laid mines and managed water, artillerymen who had fired under urgent demands, and tank crews who had waited in concealment could see physical proof of their work. Yet they had paid for that proof. Indian losses in men and equipment were real, and the strain of the fighting did not disappear because enemy tanks had been captured. Victory left exhaustion alongside pride. Pathan Nagar also helps correct a common misunderstanding about armored warfare. People often imagine tank battles as decisive because tanks destroy tanks. That happened at Asal-Uttar, but it was only part of the story. Many tanks become casualties because their movement is first compromised. A tank trapped in soft ground, separated from infantry, delayed by mines, exposed on a road, or forced to turn under fire is already in danger before the fatal hit arrives. Some vehicles may be abandoned not because they were shattered in a duel, but because recovery is impossible. Fuel is gone, crews are cut off, or the tactical situation has collapsed. Wreckage is the final condition of many different processes, not a single explanation. The gathering of tanks into Pathan Nagar turned a dispersed battlefield into a concentrated memory. That is powerful, but it can also simplify. The battle had involved many local actions across several days, and the larger Kemkaran story continued beyond the most famous armored clash. Public memory often prefers one place and one image, because images are easier to carry than complex operational narratives. In this case, the image was a field or collection of patterns that seemed to summarize everything: Pakistan's bold thrust, India's defensive adaptation, and the failure of modern armor against prepared ground. The summary was not false, but it was incomplete. The real meaning lay in the chain that produced it. That chain began before the tanks were wrecked. It began with the widening of the war, the Pakistani decision to seek a breakthrough, the Indian withdrawal to Asal-Uttar, the mining and flooding, the defensive box, and the courage of infantry, artillerymen, engineers, and tank crews. It also included Pakistani delays, reconnaissance problems, difficulties in combined arms coordination, and the challenge of sustaining a fast armored operation through obstructed ground. Pathan Nagar was therefore not a miracle scene after a mysterious victory. It was the visible end of a military process. Each wrecked or captured vehicle pointed backward to a moment when the offensive lost speed, lost awareness, lost support, or lost the ground it needed to move. In the longer history of armored warfare, Payton Nagar stands as a warning against technological confidence detached from battlefield reality. Since the first tanks appeared in the First World War, armies have been tempted to believe that armored vehicles can solve the problem of movement by their own power. They can do extraordinary things, but only when the conditions around them support movement, communication, supply, and coordination. Assault Uttar showed that post-war tanks, even modern and respected ones, could still be defeated by terrain, obstacles, fire, and disciplined defense. The graveyard of Paytons did not mean the tank age was over. It meant the tank age remained governed by the oldest rules of war: ground, time, fear, command, and supply. Payton Nagar matters because it gave Assault Uttar an unforgettable visual memory. But the visual memory must lead us back to understanding, rather than away from it. The wrecked tanks were eerie because they showed strength made useless. They were sobering because they marked the cost paid by men inside machines and by civilians whose fields became a battlefield. They were important because they proved that the drive toward the Bayas had failed in material, visible form. Yet the real lesson was not that Paytons could burn. Every tank can burn. The lesson was that armored power, when drawn into the wrong ground and stripped of tempo, can be transformed from a weapon of decision into a monument to failed assumptions.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.